I recently watched a lecture from Richard D. Wolff. He's a Marxian economist and one of the prominent advocates for Marxism I've seen today. He's very persuasive, highly intelligent, and quite accomplished professionally. I don't want to make this a challenge to the man himself and what he has accomplished, but rather a challenge to his ideas and the way he brings forward his arguments about Marxism and his opposition to capitalism. In this particular lecture, he talks about a few things that I want to address, and I'll begin with his notion of democratizing the workplace. Mr. Wolff raises the issue of there being many workers and only a handful of owners of a corporation or a business. He seems to complain there is no sense of democracy in the workplace and that employees should have more say in what happens at the company. I think this is a nonsensical idea. Democracy and representative government applies in the political sphere, granting political liberty, or at least some degree of political liberty to voting citizens. And I don't see how such a similar system could be applied in the business setting, or if it would prove to serve the business as a whole, particularly in competitive markets like we have today. Richard Wolff made the case for empowering workers to make decisions, saying, quote, "We therefore propose reorganizing enterprises such that workers become their own bosses. That means placing the workers in the position of their own collective board of directors, rather than having directors be non-workers selected by shareholders. This is not primarily a matter of workers as owners of these enterprises, nor primarily as managers. It is the tasks of direction, the decision-making now assigned usually and primarily to corporate boards of directors, and only secondarily to the major shareholders. Who choose them. That must be transferred to the workers collectively. We call such enterprises worker self-directed enterprises. They embody economic democracy by locating it first and foremost inside the enterprises producing the goods and services upon which society depends. WSDEs represent the goal, and their growth and proliferation represents the mechanism to transition from the present capitalist system to a far better next system." Close quote. I must first address that the reasons executives are put in positions of power and influence are because they have experience in said positions in leading and directing organizations towards their goals. Mr. Wolff, and I'm open to being proven wrong, suggests placing democratic responsibility in the hands of people who've not been hired to make such decisions for a company. What qualifies the shop floor worker to make decisions as to the direction of the company? Wolff continues and proposes what employees or workers should decide for the company. Quote, "Our core goal is the development of a major, and if possible prevailing, sector of the economy that is comprised of enterprises, offices, factories, farms, and stores, in which the employees democratically perform the following key enterprise activities. A. Divide all the labors to be performed. B. Determine what is to be produced, how it is to be produced, and where it is to be produced. And C. Decide on the use and distribution of the resulting output or revenues, if output is monetized." Close quote. It is not the workers that decides whether they are the shop floor worker or the top CEO. It is the market that determines much of what is described above. The market makes demands for goods and services, and it is up to companies to deliver to that demand. It is the responsibility of the executive at most companies to monitor performance and labor to determine how much should be produced and what should be produced is based on the analysis of the market demand. I would argue that while many employees do not have a direct vote on the direction of the company, it would be unwise for any manager or executive to ignore the voice of the people on the ground. There are ample opportunities for people to report and voice their concerns about the company or to make suggestions about the best way forward. It's not democracy in the sense of one person, one vote, no. But we mustn't look at business in that way. Business is a cooperative effort from the top to the bottom to achieve a shared goal. We need to start seeing these corporations as teams of workers, working together rather than as an executive class and a working class where one exploits the other. It's not true and it's not fair to the nature of most businesses that survive not on internal competition, but rather on internal cooperation. Richard Wolff delivers a scathing rebuke of Jeff Bezos, saying the source of his wealth is merely delivering packages quickly, something he seems to not think is worth the billions Jeff Bezos has been paid for his labor. He also says those who work for Bezos would not approve of his efforts to put rockets into the sky if they had say in where to spend the surplus funds. Let's look at Amazon a little more closely and shed some light on the company that I think Mr. Wolf deliberately ignores to make his point. The reality is the company is about far more than delivering goods quickly. That is what they do, the service they provide. Customers expect quick delivery, and they certainly get it, and I'm sure it is one reason they keep coming back to do business with Amazon. Amazon has also made a lot of money for other companies like UPS and FedEx, leading to more employment opportunities for workers that wouldn't be there otherwise. Amazon has also been in the business of selling books for many years. Imagine the exchange of knowledge and the joy of books that have been shared across the globe using the Amazon platform. Books are the source of knowledge and entertainment for society, and it has never been easier to exchange books as we have done for centuries. It's also provided a platform for people to self-publish on a large online platform, something only a few people have been able to do historically. It's an invaluable service to society that only can enhance our culture and civilization in a positive way. Amazon also fulfills the orders of many entrepreneurs through their fulfillment by Amazon service. They also provide advertising opportunities and a place for people to sell their own products. Amazon does so much more than delivering products quickly, as Mr. Wolf suggests. Jeff Bezos earns a lot of money, proportionate to the influence he has on the economy. Billions of shipments every year has led to billions of dollars made by Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Can we really blame him or fault him for the success he's had? Apple announced in 2018 that they were about to reach 2 billion devices sold. Should we fault Apple and Steve Jobs for creating it? Microsoft has shaped the way millions and millions of people communicate and interact with technology. Should we fault the proportionate award that has been given to Bill Gates for those efforts? My answer is absolutely not. It is important to keep a sense of proportion when talking about these issues, and Mr. Wolf throws the proportion out entirely. The young man or woman charged with delivering a package or picking a package from the warehouse cannot command the same compensation as his manager, nor his supervisor. Nor can the manager command the same compensation as the CEO. Their responsibilities will vary, and so will their compensation. Individuals within a company are compensated proportionate to the work that they do, and Jeff Bezos has made the employment of 647,500 people at Amazon possible, not to mention the employment for people in the 17 subsidiary companies owned by Amazon. I'm sure there are criticisms to be laid at big corporations like Amazon, and I'm all for encouraging wealthy individuals like Jeff Bezos to do good with their money and to give back to the community. But to undermine his efforts to summarize a complex business as, quote, delivering packages quickly, is poor form. It is this poor argumentation that is engaged in when discussing Marxism. The whole idea is to paint the Jeff Bezos types of the world as greedy capitalists with no regard for the working man, and instill in the working man a sense of animosity towards their employer, with which they currently voluntarily engage with. Is it just that one man should earn so much while others learn so little? If we consider intellectual labor to be just as valuable and important as physical labor, then we should encourage the Jeff Bezos types in the world, just as much as we encourage the man who labors with his hands more so than his mind. We also have to consider the risk required and effort made to build a company like Amazon from the ground, which Richard addresses in his speech. He reckons the risk of the employee is just as great as the risk of the capitalist, and in the case of Jeff Bezos, it is simply not true. He was pinching a company and concept of selling books on the internet at a time when many people didn't even know what the internet was. The company had a humble beginning, as many things do, and it's continued to rise and develop over time to the company it is today, and we should not take those efforts lightly for the sake of class warfare. Mr. Wolf expresses Marxism in a rather palatable way, but he doesn't get down to the hard questions around implementing Marxism in a capitalist society. The ownership of capital is in the hands of a few, that is true, and they engage with the working public to contribute their part of the operation. The hurdle Mr. Wolf and other Marxists have to overcome is how you transfer ownership of capital and property from the minority group of capitalists into the hands of the working majority. It requires theft on a mass scale justified by some perceived injustice. I would argue that workers have entitlement to the portion of capital or surplus gain proportional to their contribution to the operation. We forget the risk entrepreneurs expose themselves to get an operation like Amazon off the ground. And in forgetting that, we ignore the justification of the handsome reward that they get if they are successful. I voiced some of my opinions on the video by Richard Wolff, and I was met with an interesting response. One user replied to me saying, "We don't persuade capitalists to pay taxes. Capitalists pay taxes under direct threat of seizure or jail time from the state apparatus. Don't give me this wishy-washy moral defense of the exploiters of the world. Their property is unjustified and should be seized." Close quote. The game being played here is the game Friedrich Hayek warned against. He said there were 3 reasons why such a numerous group with very similar views are not to be formed by the best elements of society, but rather the worst. The last reason he gives is the approach Richard D. Wolff is taking to sell Marxism to people. Hayek said, quote, "To weld together a closely coherent body of supporters, the leader must appeal to a common human weakness. It seems easier for people to agree on a negative program, on the hatred of an enemy, on the envy of the better off, than on any positive task." Close quote. The contrast between the we and the they is consequently always employed by those who seek the allegiance of huge masses. This is Hayek speaking still. The enemy may be internal, like the quote unquote Jew in Germany or the quote unquote kulak in Russia, or he may be external. In any case, this technique has a great advantage of leaving the leader greater freedom of action than would almost any positive program. Close quote. We can see the enemy being presented in this talk. It is the Jeff Bezos types in the world. It is those with extraordinary wealth. It is easy to hate these people, to discredit their efforts and undermine them as simply moving packages quickly. It is easy to feel envy that they have so much and that we have so little, because it is true. But does it do anyone good by feeling envy or hatred for them? The better approach is to use what Jordan Peterson described to stave off the envy we might feel. Rather than comparing ourselves to Jeff Bezos, we should compare ourselves to who we were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. If we take this approach, we will avoid being driven by envy and hatred for other people. Hayek goes on to say, quote, "Advancement within a totalitarian group or party depends largely on a willingness to do immoral things. The principle that the end justifies the means, which in individualist ethics is regarded as denial of all morals, in collectivist ethics becomes necessarily the supreme rule. There is literally nothing which the consistent collectivist must not be prepared to do, if it serves the good of the whole, because that is to him the only criterion what ought to be done." Close quote. We can already see this playing out in my exchange with a person in the comments section of the video. I posed the ethical and moral dilemma of taking by force from one to give to another, simply because that person has more. I'll repeat the words again. Don't give me this wishy-washy moral defense of the exploiters of the world. Their property is unjustified and should be seized. Or, in other words, the ends justifies the means.